Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Dance Teacher Pep Talk. I am your host, Amanda, and I am so glad you are here. This is a space for dance teachers and anyone interested in teaching dance who is looking for motivation and fresh ideas. As teachers, we spend our days motivating and giving pep talks to our students, and now this podcast is a pep talk just for you. We hope that it helps to ignite new ideas and even work through some deep dance-related thoughts before you head into the studio. Thank you for your support, and now let's get into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Dance Teacher Pep Talk. Today's episode is a little different from the typical episodes that I put out, and that's because usually in an episode, I like to put together content that has a broad scope or a broad reach because so many of us teach different styles of dance, and I want us to be able to take what we can from these episodes and apply it to the different styles that we teach. But today's episode is going to be specific about one skill area, and that is turning. So a little bit of a technique tip episode, if you will. And these are just some tools and tips that I have over the years really put together that I've seen great results with. And I wanted to share these here because I feel like, at the start of a new year, we're also at a halfway point, most of us, through our dance season. And it's nice to have some fresh or different ideas to work with, especially when it comes to skills, because sometimes I found that with skills, you make a lot of headway, you make a lot of gain with something, and then maybe we hit a plateau. And to break through that plateau, sometimes we need a different look or a different idea, a different image, maybe that will help the student to kind of break through that plateau. Like I personally remember, and oh my gosh, it sounds so different now, like speaking on it, seeing how many turns people do nowadays. But I remember when I was younger, the stuck feeling I had from going from a single pirouette to a double pirouette. It was like, getting over that hurdle of more than one turn and then beyond, And so these plateaus that we reach, they can be frustrating for our students. And so, I've seen that. And through the years, like I said, I've sort of put together a couple different things that I have found really good results with, and I wanted to share today. So if you enjoy this technique tip type of episode, please let me know over on my Instagram at Dance Teacher Pep Talk, because I'd love to do more of these. Aside from dance, I have such a fascination with how the body works, and I love expanding my knowledge on that. That's actually one of my 2025 promises to myself, is to expand my knowledge even more, because I love learning. I love growing in this. And so with all that I have in my background of knowledge, these are just things that I have enjoyed sharing with my students, and now I'm enjoying sharing with you. So a little background on myself, if you haven't listened to my background episodes, yes, I am a dance teacher, but my schooling when for college and all of that, my degree is actually in elementary education, and my concentration for that area is science. So because of that, I minored in science for that, and my concentration area was science. So I had a lot with, anatomy, biology, that sort of thing. And I love using that content in my teaching as well. And along with being a dance teacher, I also in 2014 became certified in Pilates. And today's episode, I am going to go into quite a few Pilates tips. But I have found so many of the Pilates principles to be very helpful in my personal dance training and also for my students, specifically when it comes to technical skills. And, aside from Pilates, like I mentioned with my background in education, I find it's so helpful to be relatable with my cueing and explanations of things when I'm bringing in things that the students are working with in their school curriculum. So depending on their age, many dancers may, take geometry, physics, and more, especially I think it depends. 8th grade, you may start physical science. And then, you definitely touch upon it in elementary school too, but really going into depth of it and, other subject areas like that. So I like to use that in my teaching as well, because I think it's so important to not only take what they're doing in school, but to build on it further. It's like taking the theory and putting it into a practical situation with their dancing. And I have found a lot of light bulb moments with that. So today we're going to talk about some Pilates tips that have helped with turning, and also using school curriculum to help connect ideas within turning as well. So I hope you enjoy. Let's get into the tips. So first off, I'm going to break down some different Pilates ideas. And if you have ever taken a Pilates class, I've mentioned this in other episodes, something that I love about it, especially a classical Pilates class, is it's not about the amount of movement that you do, but how well you do that movement. And I think that's such a great tool to translate with our dancers, with what we're doing in the classroom, because we can easily, we live in a time where dancers are filling their schedules with hours and hours of dance and rehearsal, and overtraining, overuse is something that we see quite often, especially with, injuries that are happening. A lot of them are happening because of overtraining. And so even looking in our classes, like how much are we doing this skill repetitively? Can we take a break? Can we do something that is conditioning of that skill that takes a break off of that movement for a bit, but still would benefit it? So, just taking a look at that. And for me, Pilates has been a great tool for that. So Pilates is a system that was created by Joseph Pilates. And within the classical system, there is a sequence. There is fundamental work, there's introductory and beginner, intermediate, advanced, and everything builds upon one another. And just like in dance, there is a foundation, and the foundation of a lot of the movements is seen in fundamentals. And fundamentals, really, I found so many of them that applied to turning. And so one of them is called rib cage arms. So I'm going to try to explain this. Rib cage arms is typically done lying on your back, but you could take it to standing as well. So applying it in different planes of space is helpful. But ribcage arms kind of looks like a lat pull down if you're similar to the machine or action that you would do maybe in a gym. But why I love ribcage arms for turns is because it has us build an understanding of the use of the arms. It has us connecting to the concept of the corseting. I don't even know if that's a word, but the corset action of the rib cage and how our arms are functioning with our back space. So with rib cage arms, we want to keep those ribs knit together while, still maintaining breath. We don't want to hold our breath. That is something that I see a lot with rib cage arms. It's all of a sudden we turn off our breathing so that our ribs will stay melted into our body, but we want to still breathe. So having that is another important skill with it. But you're just taking those arms back overhead and back to return fingertips to the sky. And as we're doing this, we don't want the rib cage to change. We want it to maintain that stability. And sometimes for turning, I'll do this where I take arms in second, like a port de bras second on the ground, and I draw them into first, still feeling that engagement of the lat pulling down the back and feeling that hugging of the rib cage. And you could even take this a step further by extending the legs long on the ground and maybe taking a slide of the passe up into a parallel position and then returning. So ribcage arms, it's definitely a great one that I've seen great results with, I should say. Another one that's wonderful is clockwork. This is great for pelvic alignment. So with clockwork, we're taking again, we're lying down on the ground, and it's almost like we're scooping the pelvis up. That would be your 12 o'clock position. We'd release into our 3 o'clock position. We're taking the pelvis now into a 6 o'clock position and then a 9 o'clock. So if you're thinking of the face of a clock, the 12, the 3, the 6, and the 9, and we're drawing the pelvis into those different areas. This, I think, is really helpful because so often I will see actually both a tucked or a tilted state of the pelvis. Now, either of those can really throw the alignment in a turn, in a balance, even just in general technique. Grand plie is definitely an area where I tend to see a tucked pelvis quite often. And so we have to really help us to be aware of that neutral pelvis. And clockwork is a great way to find that because the students can feel the shifts of the different places in that clock face, and then finding where is the neutral, where is the between of all of those points. And you could even just bring it as basic too as doing a tuck and a tilt, and that would be your 12 o'clock and you're 6 o'clock. So tucking, meaning you're taking the tailbone, tucking it up underneath, almost reaching towards your knees, like if a dog was tucking its tail. And then that tilting position is when you're really pushing that tailbone back, almost like a duck tail posture.
And then the between is that neutral. So I find that really helpful because in turns, we want to find that neutral pelvis. Another fundamental that I find wonderful to be in anything, really, even leg lifting of an action, is knee floats. So again, lying on your back, having feet parallel, hips width apart, knees bent, and just floating one knee and one leg at a time in a 90 degree shape to a tabletop. Okay. So just floating it up and down to that tabletop and really trying to connect the idea that we are lifting the leg from the powerhouse, lifting the leg from the core. Whatever it is that you want to use as terminology there, I think can be very helpful. So, when we're drawing our leg up and, we have our primary movers of that leg, but we always want to make sure that we're also like facilitating those primary movers, assisting them with that core, with that powerhouse. And so I love doing knee floats. The image work in Pilates too, like sometimes we talk about zipping up or like the buttons, like pulling up the buttons from, like if you were putting on a pair of high-waisted pants and we're zipping up or we're buttoning up all the buttons. What I love about that image is that it not only draws the muscles in, but it also helps the pelvic muscles to meet the abdominals in a way that stabilizes. And it also, like when you're wearing high-waisted pants, it's not just the front that comes up, but also the side. So it gives this idea of like this front, back, and side body hugging there. Another exercise I love that is seen in the beginner mat sequence and through is, it's part of the ab 5, but the first part of it, the single leg stretch. What I love about this is it really kind of mimics this idea of that parallel passe sliding while creating that engagement of the core and of the powerhouse. So it kind of almost like looks like you're in like a crunch position. Like I'm trying to describe this in different ways for those that might not know the specifics, but you're in a crunch position with your legs in tabletop and your legs are sliding through passe and extension. It's almost like doing a bicycle crunch, but without the twist of the torso. You could add that if you wanted eventually, but I like that it just is focusing solely on the shape that you would see in your jazz pirouette, that parallel passe position. I also love doing that from plank. From a plank position, it also is a great time and opportunity to discuss the difference between closed circuits and open circuits. This actually could apply even to what students are learning in school, because I feel like I remember doing closed and open circuit work when we were like discussing electricity or stuff like that. But you can talk about having a closed shape turn versus an open shape. And you could even try it with your students and discuss like what feels more challenging. Is it more challenging to hug that passe position versus doing a turn with, say, the leg in a front attitude position, or vice versa? Because a lot of the time what I find is that the students realize the open shaped turns can be more difficult because you're away from center. And so it's harder for your center to hold on to that. So the further out that we extend from center, the harder it is. The closer we are to center, the easier it is for us to control. So that's, a great discussion too, a great like aha moment to have with your students. Another one that I love that is specific to the apparatus is pulling straps. This is something that you may see on like reformer work. But with pulling straps, again, it's that lat engagement, but this is done on your stomach. So it's not the back position. This is a great opportunity for you to like check in with the core placement while lying down, and just drawing the arms down by your side. Now, obviously, like the floor is in our way for this. When you're up higher on a raised mat or something like that, it's a lot easier. But for pulling straps, what I'll do is I'll like raise the arms overhead, reach out to a T shape, hug the arms back to like a tight I shape, and then press them forward and release the back. So this one's great too because it helps us to work on length through the spine and all the way through the neck. It like helps us to mimic like the strong back body that we want, because when we're doing turns work, there's so much focus on the front body. I mean, you have the spot that's coming from the front of your face. You have like this talk about shoulders not rounding forward, like, curling your collarbones in. You're talking about, the abdominal muscles pulling in and up, but like we cannot forget about the back side of the work, because that's what counterbalances it. That's what, that's what makes it successful. So using that, I think is really helpful. And it also helps too, strengthen in that concept of having the nice long neck so that the head is free to spot. Because if we're really pulling those shoulders up by our ears, there's no room for our head to have, space for spotting. And so I really enjoy taking it on, the front of our body onto the stomach, because it really like helps to show us like, wow, my shoulders are up to my ears. I got to like really draw them down my back. So those are all the different Pilates fundamental and beginner mat work things that I found that to be very successful in helping students connect to that jazz parallel passe. So now going into school subjects, I'm only going to touch upon these just so a little bit here, because I really find these fun and helpful, but I think the practical work that we're doing is actually like really seen in the Pilates fundamentals and beginner mat work that I just mentioned. So for one subject area, physics, I want to look at the concept of Newton's third law of motion. And that is, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And I love doing this with the beginner turners all the way up through the advanced turners. And the reason why is because I think we can find as much depth in this as we want, or it can be fun and it can be like this playful concept. So when we're looking at a turn, there are so many forces at play. There is a down force, there is an up force, but I want you to really be mindful and think about like when you're cueing turns, what are the words that we're using? Because I remember for turning, there were a lot of cues like pull up, lift up. When you think about all these things, there's a lot of up. There's a lot around the word up. And so if we are constantly up, 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 and there is no down, that opposite force counteracting it, you are not going to be balanced or centered. And so very often there is such an emphasis on the up. So I love doing this with the physics concept of the equal and opposite reaction, because we can't just have this lifted feeling. We have to have something, counteracting that for that opposite reaction. So you could do this from the ground up. Start with the feet. So let's take a look at the feet, everybody. Where is the up force here and where is the down force? Okay, we have the heel lifted, but the ball of the foot is pressing down. Okay, continue up the body, going through all the different places. The front of the body is lifted in and up, and the back body is lengthening down. We want the tailbone down. We don't want it sticking behind us. I really like to talk about all these different areas, and sometimes I find a worksheet guide might be helpful, and it might be a fun thing for students to see, because how many places, maybe here's an up arrow that we draw, here's a down arrow, and like how can you see that it all balances each other out? The shoulders are down, but the head is up, the neck is long for spotting, and you can really talk about the different elements around that. And just as much as we're talking about up and down, I think it's important that we also discuss talking about the in, or like the focus on like the sides of it. So I'm going to get into that in just a moment. But with these are just some tips. Like I said, physics, looking at the forces that are in play on the turn itself, and just, playing around with that, like changing up the cueing that we're doing. So maybe instead of saying up today, maybe we're going to say press down, like through the ball of that foot. So we're really like connecting to the ground and creating that stability that we have, really widening through the ball of the foot, spreading the toes, all of that to maintain like a really solid base. All right. And then the last subject area that I'm going to discuss today is geometry. So I forget what grade levels we kind of focus on these items in, but geometry. When we're looking at graphing, a very common concept is the X and Y axis. And I find this a very helpful tool for alignment and space. You may also use the connection of the concept of kinesphere, the bubble of space that's around us at the length of our wingspan and things like that. Like that's a great one too. But for me, the XY axis is easy because it's just like that T, that T graph kind of thing where we can like focus on that. Like where's the Y axis in our body? Where's the X axis in our body? And that Y axis goes all the way through our body like a pole. So that's the vertical axis. And I really like to envision this concept of the pole in Pilates. We also use the term column of strength, but envisioning that pole and thinking of our muscles in our insides wrapping around the pole to hold us strong while we're turning in space. So with that Y axis hugging through center, now we look for that opposite reaction or, that counterbalance like we were talking about in physics. And there's that X axis. So the X axis is pressing outward against the inward force. The energy through your elbows placed with your arms, can be symbolic and representative of that. that reaching, or even it might not even be arms in first, like maybe you're reaching your arms out in second for something, or you're taking a different port de bras position, but the reaching out away from the y-axis can also help to stabilize that. So using y-axis and x-axis can be, a fun one to use. And I even think it could be a nice one to explore with improv as well, because you could, explain like, okay, like imagine these axes, the y-axis and the x-axis through your body as you're traveling across the floor, and, thinking of it balancing you, but like, where can you take it? Can we reach through diagonal lines in the space? Like, how does it look to curve and carve through these areas? So there's a lot that can be worked and played into that as well. So I just gave a ton of information, but that was my goal today, is to really share a lot of the tools and tips and tricks that I have seen really work well and create those light bulb moments for my students. And I wanted to share that all with you. And also too, it's that time of year where we're getting back from holiday breaks and we're getting back into our bodies. We're getting back into dance. Even if you were rehearsing over your breaks, the students most likely have not been taking consistent classes. So it's a great time to check back in alignment. I love doing it at the beginning of the year. I love doing it at the midway checkpoint of the year, just to like really get back in. And so using the Pilates methods I mentioned, or the Pilates exercises I mentioned, connecting to the school curriculum, whether it's physics, geometry, or other subject areas, I think can really create a really strong imprint in the learning of the skill, because it's making, like I had mentioned before, it's taking the theory and putting it into a practical environment for the students. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you enjoyed this and want to have more technique tips or different ideas using whether it's school curriculum or Pilates work, I would love to make those episodes. So make sure to send me a message out on Dance Teacher Pep Talk Instagram, because I'd love to hear. Thank you all so much for listening to today's episode. And I'm so excited to continue to share more with you in the weeks ahead. Talk to you soon.